Welcome to Playing with Fire, the podcast for people who are ready to custom build their love.
We're talking about non-monogamy, however you design it, as an individuation opportunity.
Want to leave the default and make your life spectacularly you? You're in the right place. We're going to talk about betrayal, so it's going to be super cheerful today. What do you think?
Betrayal. What a strong, heavy word that is.
It is. I think a lot of people who hear that I study jealousy presume that I deal with a lot of betrayal, and there is a lot of conversation around betrayal, but it's jealousy so much bigger than that this isn't actually the core of my work, but it does come up over and over and over again. It also shows up when people are looking for the transition point from a monogamous perspective to a non-monogamous perspective.
Mm-hmm.
One of the questions I will ask them is, so, what have you experienced in your lifetime? And I'll ask directly, what's your betrayal experience? And with a relative amount of frequency, and this makes sense because we've all seen the numbers around cheating, the answer is often, either I've been cheated on by a partner, I have felt betrayed by a partner in the past, or when I was growing up, I watched my parents, I watched one of my parents betray the other over and over again, or there was one really big time and it all blew up and I was aware of it. Maybe we talked about it, maybe we didn't, but betrayal is part of the story of a fair number of people who are still they're looking for non-monogamy, and they're experiencing some real, there's some grit in the gears, because often if they've experienced a bunch of betrayal, one of the promises they made to themselves is, I'm never going to let that happen to me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm never going to experience
I've heard
anything
that.
other than
Mm-hmm.
perfect exclusivity. Exclusivity is,
It's the antidote.
it's the antidote. And when we build a monogamous foundation on the idea that exclusivity of attention, especially emotional attention, romantic attention, and sexual attention, if that's how you have identified, like, that's how I will know I am safe.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I will know I am not being betrayed. And then you go to shift that paradigm where now, okay, exclusivity isn't going to be the way I seek that safety. Well, fuck, what do I do?
Yeah.
How will I then? How will I know? We have to deal with betrayal head on. We have to look right at it, because I see people struggle with this for a long time because they try to just imagine that their betrayal history won't impact them. But it does. It just does.
Okay. So what does it look like then? Yeah, in conscious non-monogamy. Doing this on purpose. We've agreed, we've talked about it. We got to we know what we're doing. We have agreements.
Okay.
What's
So
a
you want,
betrayal?
well, let's first then define just betrayal, like
Okay.
the literature on betrayal. So when I say literature, I'm not talking about a dictionary definition of betrayal so much as um, I looked at some meta studies, some meta analyses of betrayal, looked at the definitions that the psychological and sociological researchers were using. And the one that I'm using most frequently now is that betrayal is defined as an act of violating the trust, loyalty, or confidence that someone has placed in you. And that is typically in the context of a relationship where there's an expectation of mutual respect, honesty, support, and often exclusivity, but not, of course, always. Betrayal involves actions and behaviors that break our implied expectations. What do we expect to have happen? Right? It violates that. It breaks the norms that we have come to expect in our relationships. And this leads to harm, distress, upset, discomfort, and also disillusionment. People wind up really disillusioned, like feeling like, oh my God, I can't trust anyone, or I can't trust this person who I counted on so much. So That's across the board in any relational context, not just romantic, certainly not just conscious
Yeah.
non-monogamy, but betrayal happens when we have an expectation in a relationship that we will experience respect, honesty, and support, and then in some way that is undermined. We experience the violation of that trust. We experience a violation of the confidence, the loyalty that we had.
Okay. So, a violation, which I mean, that's another big, heavy word, um, of some particular trust. Um, so, you mentioned so in monogamous culture, which both you and I grew up in,
Mhm.
there's a very like the most common betrayal is that violation of the exclusivity.
Yeah.
And the most the one that everybody immediately is thinking about is the violation of the sexual exclusivity.
Well, although these days the concept of the emotional affair
Right.
is
Yep.
very prevalent. So I would say right now we have this new language, this language of the emotional affair. So it's the violation of exclusivity. From the monogamous perspective, there are these areas that are supposed to be um, exclusive only, and the real trouble is in that monogamous paradigm, often we've never actually discussed what will that
Hmm.
look like in action? What in action, what does that look like? Because if I say to someone, "So is your partner allowed to have friends?" I've never had anybody tell me, "No, they're not allowed to have friends." So far, I mean, I might meet that person. The Mike Pences of the world are out there. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I might have somebody answer like, "Well, no, of course they can have friends." And now we need to dig into, "Okay, so tell me then, what what is the basis for this exclusivity? What will it look like? What will it sound like? What are the actions? And how do you know where the line is? Where's the line
Mm,
where you will draw like, "Oh, now I've been violated." And so frequently, we don't have those conversations because we use the monogamous perspective in a very unconscious way. It's
right.
the water we swim in, so we don't have to contemplate this. We don't have to ask ourselves. We know we'll know when we know.
So I could betray somebody without even knowing I was.
Yeah, it happens all the time
Yeah.
where we have 2 different perspectives on what it is to be exclusive and 2 different ways of enacting that, and I mean, we see that it is in so many TV shows, it's in songs, it's all over the place where now we have someone who's experiencing likely jealousy based on the idea that they have been betrayed, and that's not for me to decide. I'm not trying to tell anybody whether they've been betrayed or not, but I do think it's really important to get clear on, are you feeling betrayal of cultural norms? Cultural norms exist. Our societies have these cultural norms, and I don't mean just like our huge societies, but our microcosms, like the small
Hmm.
circles we float in. They have expectations, but I wanna know, have you also made those explicit? Have you really talked about them? And frequently, when we're operating in the monogamous paradigm, we just don't talk about them because we really believe that if, our relationship is good, another pretty vague word here, if it's good, then we don't even need to talk about these things because it's no, like, they'll just know. They'll know how to behave in a way that makes me feel honored and, that loyal like, that they are loyal to me. But if I don't make clear what my expectations are, then a surprise betrayal can happen when truly there is no intention to violate that trust. So, this is something that we can all relationship structures can increase their viability over the long term just by having more conversations about what exactly are the expectations, what are these agreements, what constitutes a violation of our trust or our rules around exclusivity, whatever
Yeah.
those are.
In the microcosm of my day job, I have mandatory yearly trainings on what the boundaries are.
Yeah,
Things and they make it very clear, and I
and
have
you
to
have a
click
really
all the
boring
boxes,
job.
and it's not a lot going on in there. Um,
No,
there
I
aren't
mean,
a
you have a job where you have access to people's personal information, But your job is a technical job, and yet still they go to the trouble of making sure that you are trained on where's the line?
Yep.
Where's the
Where's
line?
the line?
It's
What
making
are
me think
the
of that Pussifer song.
yeah.
Where is the line
Where's the
exactly?
line?
Can I back that my donkey right up to the line? Um,
Yeah. And I'm bringing this up because it's in contrast to well then I come home, and if I haven't and so my job gets very unhappy if I violate those boundaries. And by the way, they tell me exactly what's going to happen.
yeah, and it's usually involving quite a lot of money, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's
Yep.
a financial, ramification to violating those
Yeah.
because you
They
work in a
make it.
HIPAA,
Yeah.
yeah.
$10,000 a pop. It's a lot. It adds up. So they tell me, here's what you need to do. Crossing that line is a problem, and this is what will happen when you do.
So
And then I come home, and now I'm in a relationship with you. So we have these conversations, but no other relationship that I've ever been in has included an explicit discussion of what are the boundaries and what happens when they get crossed. So betrayal kind of in my mind, my connotations are that's if that's not a deal breaker, it's really close to a deal breaker.
mm.
But still, okay, what happens when I break the deal? Because we haven't talked about it.
Right, we have to know. So, the key aspects of betrayal for me are there's a violation of
Yeah.
trust, right? So there's this feeling. Trust is a feeling, right?
Hmm.
Um, it impacts the stability and safety of my attachment needs. It impacts my ability to access that sense of my
Right.
attachment need
It
being met.
impacts your pattern recognition
Yeah.
and your anticipation of the future.
It also there's this element of dishonesty or deception. And that's an interesting one because if someone is not meaning to violate or they don't
Right.
think they're violating any agreements that you have, they may not be being dishonest or deceiving you in any sort of overt way, but they might be not sharing all the information they have because they don't recognize it as
Yeah.
information that needs to be shared. So, this is
Yeah.
another place we have to think about what's the kind of transparency that we require in order to be in a relationship with us. Um, there's a breach of expectations. And this is where I think conscious non monogamy or conscious monogamy, I don't care which framework you want, if either of them are consciously done, we have to make our expectations as clear as we can. And that has to happen in an ongoing sense because my expectations change over time. They just do. I'm changing, I'm growing. So we have to keep having these conversations. Otherwise, I'm going to experience the harm of having my expectations thwarted, and it sucks. It doesn't feel good. And that to me, that's the feeling of betrayal, right? So there's the action of betrayal, but the feeling of betrayal, that ugh. I mean, I trust is a super high need for me. So to have to experience betrayal is a it feels like a major violation in my body. So, but we can experience a violation of the norms, the expectations in a non monogamous context just as easily as in a monogamous context. Just because I have opened the door to having multiple partners doesn't mean that anything goes. It just doesn't. And so recently I heard somebody I was working with say that they found out that they had cheated many months ago.
Right.
They found out.
Yep.
They had no idea. So they had taken an action and um And then much later, they like, their partner knew the action had happened. Much later, they realized that their partner had classified this action as cheating, as a betrayal of their agreements. But the person who had been in violation really didn't know it. They didn't take it in that way because it didn't impact them that way. They were like, "Well, we're open, and yes, I had this other experience, but we're open to other experiences." And this is where it gets so important for everybody to be on board doing the work of crafting actual agreements, not just saying, we're just going to have a basic guideline. Love is love, and we want more love in our life, and like it's fine. We'll just talk about it because we're going to go through life and have opportunities to interact with other people. And if I don't know where your edge is, it is really easy for me to violate the sanctity of that edge.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And whose responsibility is that?
Mhm.
If you have not told me where that edge is, how can I possibly know about it? And if you say, well, you should just assume, how small should the box be? This gets really complicated really fast.
Mhm.
Because again, I have friends, I have emotional connections, I have physical connections. Okay, like how do we define and determine where the edges are? And we can't. It's paradoxical because we also can't just make a list and say, "Okay, here's all the rules. Operate within these rules," because
Yeah.
'cause we're not
No.
machines, right?
Yep.
If I were a bot, you would be constantly trying to define the terms for me and make sure that I knew where the edges were so I didn't drive off the table, right?
Right.
But I I I'd be
But
creative and
that's
I'd keep finding ways to drive myself right off the table. Um so there's the paradox of we're never going to be able to enumerate every single edge, every single line, and we still have to actually create an ongoing um, dialectic of like, yes, we're in this together. We're co-creating this relational situation, so that I can start to empathize and imagine where your lines are real time. And I think it's
yeah.
paradoxical for me because 'cause I'm always telling people, like, "Make your stuff transparent and clear," and I want you to, and we also have to be able to apply our judgment
Well,
and
yeah, what you're talking about, I think, is critical thinking.
yeah,
Um, our relationship, yours and mine, is a pretty complicated one, and we define as much as we can, and are pretty frequently coming up with situations that we hadn't thought about.
right.
And that requires some, well, it requires me to be engaged in my own work to understand what I'm doing, why I'm doing what I'm doing. Is this in alignment with my values? And then to also um, investigate my mental model of you, and say, how does this line up with your values and our agreements? The world is really complicated, and brand new situations that have never occurred before happen every day.
Yeah, they
uh,
do.
right.
They
and
do.
and so we have to um, meet that with flexibility and
Right.
resilience and creativity.
And that's the biggest difference between an unconscious,
Hmm.
monocentric perspective, where we're hoping that the general standards and norms and expectations of the culture at large and our understanding of them will just uphold the
Yep.
edges for us.
Right.
So to adapt the definition of betrayal over for a non-monogamous setting, we have to take into account the fact that we're going to have ongoing conversations. We're going to make explicit agreements. And those terms and agreements, yeah, they may get violated. Ideally, they won't, but they may. And so you said something earlier that I think is important. What happens next?
Yeah.
If if things don't go as expected, what are we going to do? Because a lot of times people will tell me things like, "Well, I won't tolerate a violation of my agreement." I'm like, "Okay, so what will you do next?" Because even if you say, "Okay, then that means I dissolve this relationship." Okay, how? Because the
Hmm.
more intricate this relationship is, the more it takes effort then to disentangle it. How will you go about that? And I don't mean that you even have to have all of this written down, but if you aren't able to entertain the thought of, wow, what would it be like? What would it be like for me, Ken? I'm thinking, so you had a relationship a few years ago that really pushed me to an edge. You didn't
Yeah.
violate, you did not betray me in any way. Um, I was still experiencing profound jealousy, and I could make a story up that would have easily gotten me into a spot where I decided that there was some line that you had crossed, right? I could have easily written a betrayal story and justified, okay, that's it. You've violated my agreement and now we have to split. Okay. So what happens now? Can I entertain the reality that we're disentangling multiple aspects of a life? Um, if I can entertain that reality, for long enough to just realize, wow, betrayal is complicated. Because what if instead of disentangling, what if I want to rebuild? What if
Right.
I want to
Different
rebuild?
story there.
And and so what are the actions I'm going to take next? Is it going to be um, am I gonna be looking for an apology? Am I going to be looking for some sort of accountability? Am I looking for you to take ownership of your actions? And what if you don't feel that you violated, an agreement? Or what if you agree, "Yes, I violated an agreement, but I didn't understand the parameters of that agreement. So I'm willing to get in here and make a new, more elaborate agreement," or, "Wow, yeah, I violated that agreement. I still really wanna be in relationship with you. Can we come back to the table?" What do we each need then? What does it look like to repair from betrayal or the sensations of betrayal in order to move forward
Yeah.
together?
So any direction from there requires figuring out what you're going to do.
Yeah. So I think the concept of betrayal touches for me on how well resourced am I to meet betrayal with some flexibility, some psychological flexibility, and also some resilience, but also an understanding that life isn't perfect
Yeah.
and that we're going to go through life. And sometimes I'm going to draw a hard line and say, "Yep, I I will not continue this relationship." And sometimes I'm going to say, "Wow, I will continue this relationship. I didn't even know I was available to do that, but I will."
Yeah.
Now, what are we going to put in place? And a lot of times when I see people making agreements to try to solidify their non-monogamy, they make agreements where, let's say it's about like protecting the emotional exclusivity. They'll maybe make an agreement around using certain words. Yeah, but what happens when the words get used? What if your partner really does fall in love with someone else? Is so where do we go forward?
Yeah.
That rule may have served some sort of purpose in giving you the illusion of safety by controlling words, but did it
But
actually
did it actually?
provide safety?
Hmm.
Or did it provide some soothing of within the idea of like, no, they'll put up limits and they won't use these words, and this is how I'll feel special. Another thing that comes up is people make agreements around sexual health and about using barriers. And as a sexual educator, I'm like pro use of barriers. Great, awesome. But then oftentimes there'll be at some point this desire to not use barriers with one or more partners. Okay, what do we do if our partner violates that agreement? Usually, what happens is we write into our agreement, like, okay, if someone doesn't use barriers, then there'll be STI testing and there'll be so there'll be STI testing and then there'll be a waiting period where we will use barriers while we wait for your STI results to come back and then we'll move forward. None of that addresses the emotional content.
Yeah. That's what I was noticing. Right. So those are
Those
more
are
or less
health.
mechanical actions. Yeah.
Yeah.
This is what we do. Okay. Now, having dealt with that, the medical aspects of things, what's going on in our hearts? What are we feeling around all of this?
And I find that this is where imagination becomes important because it it's challenging to put yourself in a situation where you are imagining what it will feel like when a partner violates an agreement. But if the
Yeah, that is very important. Yeah.
but if the only way I contemplate my agreements is I'm making these agreements and of course they won't be violated. They won't. Then I'm likely not to put a repair plan in place that actually addresses the fact that no, in fact, we hurt each other all the time. Well-meaning humans in healthy relationships still hurt each other.
Hmm.
It happens. So what am I going to do? So one of the pieces of repair that you and I have built into one of our agreements is that um, if there is an emotional betrayal, and I don't mean about falling in love because we're both we both welcome that particular thing.
We
But
do.
if there's an emotional betrayal, let's say of like information that I've asked not to be shared, or of an invitation to be at an event that I don't expect that person will be at. And then now I'm in a position where now I'm like, oh, I didn't expect them. And so if that emotional stuff is upheaved a word? I don't know that it is. If I feel the emotional upheaval of having to deal with something, um, we have an agreement that we'll take a weekend sometime in the next month to just spend together the whole weekend, so that because I know myself, it takes a lot of words. I need to get a lot of words out, and it takes dedicated time because I'm just gonna need to verbally process like a shit ton. And so we just built that in because that verbal processing time is something that I need, and I need it to happen pretty quick. So it needs to be like really quickly after that betrayal, that violation, um, that expectation is not met.
And
It's an
the
attempt to accommodate what my actual emotional being needs.
right. And so having the conversations beforehand about what's going to happen is important because in the aftermath of a betrayal, um, everybody's going to be in a very different emotional place. They're going to be dysregulated. They're going to be feeling things that they won't feel later,
Right.
but they feel like everything in the moment.
And if a person is betrayed, that's one kind of emotional dysregulation. And then what if you're the person who's being accused of
Hmm.
having betrayed? Whether
Exactly.
you there's the question of, do you agree whether this is a betrayal or not? Do you have are you able to hold space for your partner having that experience while also simultaneously being like, I don't believe that I have violated your trust. Like, what are you gonna do? I think you're onto something. We It's hard to imagine
Hmm.
just how different I will feel
Yep.
if this betrayal has happened, if the agreement or expectations have been thwarted. How the difference is monumental, and I find that people are hesitant to go there, right? They don't want to imagine that,
When things are going well, um, it can be hard to imagine what's going to happen when, like, what it's going to feel like when they are not going well,
right?
because then it feels like they're not going well. Like that's
So
what imagination is all about.
yeah, so in that, I ask people to get into an imaginal space where you have some ability to actually experience the emotional gravity of that. Like, yeah, can you put yourself into like, okay, this has not played out the way I thought it was. My agreement has been violated. What do you need? We used to use the tool of scheduling a time to go to our shared analyst, our shared therapist, and that was great. Now we don't have one that we share. Like, we each have therapists, but we don't have one that we share that we both like going to currently. So that's not the tool we're using right now. There are others too. I mean, I one of the tools that we used early on that we didn't write this one down, but the repair plan was we needed to both get outside.
Yeah,
Because our house was sort of mired in a lot of chaos at the time, and there were also sort of ongoing, constant small, like, micro betrayals happening.
there's a lot of um, emotional resonance of things that had happened, and
Yeah, and
yeah.
you were the one who noticed, like, "Oh, we need to have an agreement that we get out of this house. We get out of the house and away from the place that's holding, a lot of the pain. Get away from there long enough to regulate again, to co-regulate, to come back to a spot where we can co-regulate." I think leaning into a lot of people are very doing very well to have, have a coach, have a therapist, have a counselor who can hold space for you
Mhm.
when you're in this spot, when there has been a violation. I know other people who use different medicine journeys to hold
Yep.
that space for themselves, either together or individually. And it's up to you. What would work for you? Um, and the other piece that's important about this, like, how do I manage the gravity of the betrayal is what order do you need all of this to happen in?
Oh, that is important. Yeah.
Because you often will rush to an apology,
Yep.
which sounds nice. Like on paper, it sounds great. Like, okay, if this agreement is broken, then an apology, an accountability ladder will be followed. That sounds great. In the moment, that enrages me. It enrages me. I do not want an immediate apology. Instead, I want space to vocalize what I'm feeling.
Hmm.
So we've found over time that an imago dialogue is a much more effective technique. We can link to the example conversation of the
Yeah.
imago dialogue and how we use it for these times, because I need to express the feelings. What about you? What order do you tend to need these things to happen in?
Um, I'm still working on that because one of the first things that I want to do is go away. So, like, it would be easy to say, the first thing I want is space. And the thing that I'm working on is, mm, okay, when am I going to not want space anymore? Like, I haven't worked out that process. So usually I've been skipping it because I don't trust it. I don't trust it to not just be an avoidance strategy that is designed to do an end run around the whole thing.
So I've been encouraging you to go ahead and take space, but to tell me when you'll be back.
That
And
has
we've been
helped a
practicing
lot.
that for years,
Yep.
but there's something really tricky in there because I see you not sure what to do when you're taking space. But
Which
isn't that the
I,
biggest difference? Like if you take space with intentionality,
yeah.
it's
Oh,
very different than
yeah.
I'm just going to go away and pretend like this isn't happening.
I know I have a short list of things that I choose from to do. I won't necessarily do them all, but I have gone away and done what's that called? A book purge.
Yep.
Just write everything down. Just write it down. Don't worry about anything about what it looks like or sounds like. Just write it all down. That has helped. And I started doing that years ago. And since that time, I have I've learned a lot about neurosomatic intelligence and regulation drills, and it is a regulation drill.
Mm,
Um, it also helps me frame some of my thoughts sometimes, but getting in the cold plunge can work just as well.
right.
Because when I get out of the cold plunge, I'm in a different emotional and cognitive space than when I got in. So, um, but an apology, I don't think I want an apology right away either, because I'm too likely to just take it and gloss
You're
over everything.
you're really nice.
Yeah.
You're very, very nice.
Nice. Yeah. Let's keep it all nice and
Yeah.
not real.
Yeah.
And the real, and so, which is one of the reasons going away is feels suspicious to me, because it feels like avoiding the real. But
So
now I have strategies that aren't, and so I work through them.
right. So if you can think of the difference between the intentional break,
Hmm.
right, versus if you take a pause and you're attending to yourself, you're tending your heart, your soul, your mind, your body. That's a very different thing than avoidance. That is
Yeah,
not
it is.
avoidance.
Yeah.
That is not avoidance. You're taking the break so that you can tend to you. And the thing that I'm hearing underlying all of that is you're making meaning out of the rupture.
Yeah.
You're
Yep.
utilizing your meaning-making function, and I my clients tend to be really intelligent people. I feel very lucky. People who work with me they're brilliant, they're amazing. I love the group atmosphere because I love hearing how they all are working through their stuff, and the number one thing that I see everybody doing is, oh, they're making meaning out of their suffering. So their pain becomes meaningful and growth oriented and isn't just pain for pain's sake.
So that's interesting. 100%. Yep. I started doing that quite a while ago too, versus just like trying to get to resolution. I've been trying to figure out, okay, so this happened, what's in it? What do I learn? how do I make the future better because of this little kerfuffle or gigantic betrayal, whatever it is? Um, how does the future get better because this is what happened?
Yeah.
And that's definitely not always what I have done. And sometimes, oftentimes, reaching for the apology the way I do, which enrages you, um, right? Reaching for the meaning. I'm trying to get to the okay. What are we going to make out of this? Let's get together and figure out what it is. So I'm trying to do this in a enmeshed might be too strong a word, but since there's the two of us in these circumstances, we each have our experiences. And I'm trying so hard to get to that moment where we're on the same page and working on this together.
Yeah.
But you have your experience to process, and I have mine, and we can't do it for each other.
And pacing differences is a huge piece of the
Hmm.
puzzle when
Yeah.
we're working through betrayal. Same with jealousy. Pacing differences are normal. Um, and I tend to work very, very quickly, and you tend to work more slowly, except when we're talking about this.
Yeah.
You are
Because,
much quicker.
yeah.
I will luxuriate in the pain and suffering of betrayal and jealousy. It's like a warm, green, gooey bath. So it's terrible, but I have to really allow myself to claim that space while also not then just getting stuck. So again, back to
Yeah.
holding the paradox of,
Yeah.
yep, I wanna stay in a growth mindset. I wanna stay oriented toward us coming back together without rushing myself and allowing myself to really, really experience the meaning making, which takes me more time, and more words. As before we wrap up, I wanted to come back to, wh when a betrayal happens and you have a plan for it, when you have a plan for, "Hey, we've experienced a rupture." The other big problem that I see is that if one person minimizes it and says, "This isn't a rupture,"
Mm.
and the other person has experienced it as a rupture, it's just not gonna work out. It's just not gonna work out. We have to actually believe each other.
Yes.
We have to believe and remember that simple mantra of our feelings are real. Like, they're real. And at the same time, that person who's caught in the feelings needs to remember that they're also transient.
Yep.
And they
You're
are
right.
the fact that you're feeling them is very, very real and valid and relevant, and it's not all that's going on, and you get to make a decision to move through those feelings. And when I allow myself to move through them, then I can come back together with you and work through even some I mean, we've had some horrific violations of
Yep.
trust happen in our relationship, and it's possible to work through them and to do rupture repair and also to make reparations to each other, to make
Yes.
really, like, significant commitments to, "Okay, what will I do to
I,
make this."
I'm a big fan of reparations as one of the strategies, not the only one. It's important that it not be the only one,
Yeah,
but
but how do I actually
how
address
do I
this?
actually address this? This is a sidebar, um, small thing. You mentioned a violation in um, one of my previous relationships that you experienced. You said it's not a betrayal. You wanted to be clear that it wasn't a betrayal. And it is important to me to believe you when you say something is a betrayal. I think it was. And so this is the sidebar is, yeah, we may not agree on what it is, but the person who's experiencing the violation versus the person who's doing the violating, I strongly believe that they're the one that needs to be believed.
Yeah,
And if I feel that I that my understanding of our agreements means that, oh no, that I see like I see what you've said, and I would absolutely characterize that as a a significant violation of a particular area in our relationship. Well,
yeah,
I get to take that seriously for myself, but um, it's not for me to either convince you that it was or that it wasn't, because I have to leave your experience to be yours and mine is mine.
yeah, coming to agreement about that is far more powerful than coming to alignment and like, yes, that we have the same answer because I
Yeah.
know exactly what situation you're talking about there, and I'm thinking, yeah, for me, using the word betrayal on that situation, it doesn't make sense because I
Mhm.
actually the meaning I've made out of that situation is, no, this is an area I wanted to grow and increase my capacity and also to be more, um clear in the future. Like I learned,
Mhm.
oh, I hadn't made my need clear. I hadn't made my limit and my need super clear to you. So I don't feel like you betrayed me. I feel like I got hurt. I got hurt. And
Yeah.
I didn't know that that was an edge for me. And so how were you going to know?
And my childish parts 100% will interpret any hurt I cause as a betrayal. It's like, "Oh, this is the end of the world." Um,
Little brother much?
might need to, we need to have more conversations with little Kenny about that.
Yeah. Well, speaking of the tools, you said you'll do a book purge or, journaling. And another thing that I've seen you do is turn to your inner counsel and
Yes.
talk to everybody
Mhm.
who's in there. Like, okay, who thinks that we actually are in the right here? We did not betray anyone. We did not do anything wrong. Find out what they're doing, because they're the ones that are most likely going to stop you from making that repair.
That's right,
You
and
are multiple. Like we all contain these multiple like voices and perspectives. Find out what your parts think.
it is a fascinating conversation. I love those conversations.
Well, this was, far from comprehensive. Betrayal is a
Oh,
huge
yes.
topic. We could go on, but I think this is a good place to wrap up this conversation and say, if you're struggling with this, it's probably because you haven't yet figured out how to have an ongoing narrative that allows for the reality that, yep,
Mm,
we're going to hurt each other over time, and we want to learn the skills of coming back together and recommitting to being our to being in alignment, to being in connection with each other, and to setting boundaries and observing those boundaries. Um, Takes effort, takes work.
it
It's
does.
why I love working with people over long term instead of just short term stuff because over the long term, you'll see a difference in how you show up and how you hold space for each other when you hit these big speed bumps.
Well, this is great. Thank you very much for having this conversation with me.
Thanks, Ken. We talk to you all the time. It is absolutely imperative to me that we get to hear from you as well.
Yes, please.
So, we'd love to invite you to join us. Join Ken and I. We're holding monthly Ask Me Anythings. You can show up. Bring your questions from podcast episodes, from your relationships. Bring questions about non monogamy, about individuation, about relationship skills. We would love to share space with you. We're hosting these AMAs free of charge for our podcast listeners. You are the Playing with Fire community, and it matters a ton to us that we connect with you directly. So
Oh,
go,
I would so love to hear your questions and oh, it'd be so awesome.
yeah. Go to joliehamilton.com/AMA and you'll find a way to sign up real quick and get an invitation to join us in a small group where we're going to get together and talk about all things non monogamy, individuation, and relationships.